I stand before you today, the representative of a family in grief, in a country in mourning, before a world in shock.
A stunning discovery inside the Althorp estate has sent shockwaves through the United Kingdom. Charles Spencer came forward to reveal a long-lost letter written by Princess Diana in 1997, addressed directly to Princess Anne. King Charles desperately tried to stop this revelation, but the truth is now out in the open. The heartbreaking final request hidden inside this document has left the entire nation in tears. This raw, historic message exposes a secret pact that rewrites everything we knew about the royal family's darkest days. The discovery in the Althorp stables. The dust inside the old stable block at the Althorp estate had not been disturbed in decades. On a damp morning in 2026, a team of local stonemasons began routine restoration work on the northern boundary wall of the property. The building, constructed from pale Northamptonshire stone, had served as the primary equestrian facility during the late 18th century. In recent years, it was used merely to store historical farm implements and surplus building materials. A mason named David moved a heavy oak storage rack away from the back wall of the old tack room. As the wood scraped across the stone floor, a loose section of lath and plaster paneling crumbled away, exposing a hollow cavity within the masonry. Inside the dark space sat a rectangular leather trunk, secured with a rusted brass padlock. The leather was stiff, dried out, and covered in a thick layer of gray soot. David immediately notified the estate manager, who contacted Charles Spencer. The Earl arrived at the stables within 15 minutes, accompanied by 2 private security officers. He did not wait to transport the object to the main house. Using a heavy iron crowbar, a security guard snapped the rusted padlock with a loud crack. The lid of the trunk lifted with a stiff, protesting groan, releasing the distinct smell of damp parchment and aged cedar. Inside the chest lay several bundles of legal documents regarding the estate's 20th century agricultural tenancies. But beneath the financial ledgers sat a single, pristine item that did not match the surrounding paperwork. It was a heavy cream-colored envelope, completely unaffected by the dampness of the stable wall because it had been sealed inside a specialized waterproof oilskin pouch. Charles Spencer lifted the pouch. His fingers were shaking slightly as he peeled away the protective layer. The envelope bore the distinct blue Spencer family crest at the top of the flap. The handwriting on the front was large, hurried, and immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with the history of the house. It was written in blue ink. The text read, "For the Princess Royal, hand deliver only." The document was dated August 24th, 1997. That was exactly 1 week before Diana's fatal car crash in Paris. The Earl carried the document into the Grand Library of Althorp House, locking the heavy doors behind him. He placed the envelope under a high-intensity desk lamp to examine the wax seal. The red wax was completely intact, stamped with a small, private signet ring that Diana used only for her most confidential correspondence. The existence of this letter was entirely unknown to the Spencer family archives. It had been intentionally hidden in the stables by a trusted member of Diana's personal staff during the chaotic weeks following her funeral. The discovery immediately triggered an institutional alarm. At 11 o'clock, an automated security notification reached the desk of the chief archivist at Buckingham Palace. The palace employs monitoring systems to track any significant sales, discoveries, or public announcements involving historical royal artifacts. A senior legal advisor from the Duchy of Lancaster made an urgent telephone call to Charles Spencer's legal team within 45 minutes of the lock being broken. The palace attorney delivered a formal warning. He stated that under the terms of the Public Records Act, any correspondence involving senior members of the royal family that touches upon matters of state or institutional protocol could be claimed as crown property. The lawyer requested that the trunk and its entire contents be transferred immediately to the Royal Archives at Windsor Castle for historical verification and security screening. The implied threat was clear. The palace wanted to seize the document before its contents could be read or photographed by anyone outside their circle. Charles Spencer flatly refused the request. He countered that the letter was discovered on private Spencer property, written by a private citizen who had been stripped of her royal title during her divorce proceedings in 1996. Legally, the document counted as personal Spencer heritage completely outside the jurisdiction of the sovereign's official archives. He informed the palace advisor that the letter would remain at Althorp until he had personally verified its contents and consulted with the intended recipient. The Earl sat down at his desk and used a silver paper knife to slice open the top of the envelope, preserving the wax seal perfectly. Inside were 3 pages of thick-lined paper. The text was dense, written without the usual formal structure of royal correspondence. Diana had bypassed all the standard diplomatic phrasing. The opening line was direct, raw, and entirely human. She addressed Princess Anne not by her official title, but by a private childhood nickname that only the inner family understood. A minor mystery emerged when Charles Spencer compared the letter to the estate's historical daybooks. He pulled down the leather-bound ledger for August 1997 from the library's shelf. He turned to the pages tracking the movement of visitors through the Althorp gates during that final turbulent summer. He discovered that a single line on the page for August 25th had been neatly lined out with black ink, a detail that had gone unnoticed for nearly 30 years. By holding the ledger page up to a strong ultraviolet light source, the Earl managed to read the text beneath the ink. The entry recorded the arrival of a discreet, unbadged dark green vehicle belonging to the Gatcombe Park estate. The time of arrival was listed as 4 o'clock in the morning, and the departure was logged just 20 minutes later. The driver's name was left blank, but the vehicle code matched the private security detail assigned strictly to Princess Anne. This meant that Anne had sent a trusted courier to Althorp to collect something from Diana's rooms just days before the tragedy in France. The hidden letter in the stable block had likely been prepared for that exact midnight courier run, but it had been misrouted or hidden by an employee who feared the document would be intercepted by palace security teams. The missing ledger entry proved that a silent, undocumented line of communication had been opened between the 2 women during a period when the rest of the royal household had completely cut Diana out. Charles Spencer spent the next 2 hours reading through the 3 pages under the library lamp. The text did not contain standard family gossip. It was a structured, desperate appeal from a mother who felt the walls closing in around her. Diana wrote with an intense clarity about her isolation, her fears for her safety, and her profound anxiety regarding the future development of her 2 young sons. She was reaching out to the one woman inside the palace who possessed the iron will necessary to stand up to the institutional machinery. The Earl realized that holding this paper meant holding a piece of hidden history that would permanently alter the public's understanding of the relationship between his sister and the Princess Royal. He reached for his secure telephone line and dialed a private number in Gloucestershire. The icy royal who secretly understood Diana. The private telephone line inside the study at Gatcombe Park rang at exactly 1:15 in the afternoon. Princess Anne picked up the receiver herself, bypassing her standard secretarial staff. On the other end of the line, Charles Spencer delivered the news of the discovery in the stable block. The Princess Royal listened in absolute silence, her posture tightening as her former brother-in-law described the cream envelope, the blue ink, and the unbroken red wax seal bearing the private family crest. To the British public, the idea of an intimate, confidential alliance between Princess Diana and Princess Anne seemed entirely impossible. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, the national press had consistently portrayed the 2 women as bitter, polar opposites. The newspapers labeled Anne as the cold, traditional stoic who resented the heavy media attention surrounding her younger sister-in-law. Diana was framed as the modern, emotional rebel who found Anne's rigid discipline old-fashioned and unapproachable. The historical facts within the royal household, however, revealed a completely different, much more complex dynamic. While they were never close social companions, they shared a profound mutual understanding of the true nature of the royal institution. Both women had experienced the intense, suffocating pressure of being independent outsiders trapped within a highly regulated corporate court structure. Anne had endured her own painful public divorce from Captain Mark Phillips in 1992, navigating the complex legal and emotional minefields of the palace without a public breakdown. Diana had secretly admired Anne's absolute financial and emotional independence. Anne was the only senior royal who flatly refused to play the media game, completely ignoring the tabloid headlines to focus entirely on her charity work and her military regiments. She did not use public relations advisors, she did not leak stories to chosen journalists, and she did not care about public popularity polls. Diana, who felt entirely consumed and manipulated by the global media machine, recognized that Anne possessed an inner resilience that she herself desperately needed to survive the aftermath of her separation from Charles. The core of their silent connection was rooted in their shared distrust of specific court advisors who operated within Buckingham Palace. During the mid-90s, a powerful faction of senior courtiers had initiated a systematic public relations campaign designed to protect the image of the Prince of Wales by subtly undermining Diana's public credibility. They leaked private details of her medical treatment, restricted her access to official state transport, and eventually stripped her of her official Her Royal Highness style during the final divorce settlement in 1996. Anne had watched this corporate campaign with growing disgust. While she remained fiercely loyal to her brother, she detested the underhanded tactics used by the palace inner circle. She believed that the institutional bullying of a vulnerable mother was beneath the dignity of the crown. On multiple occasions during family meetings at Balmoral Castle, Anne had openly confronted senior advisors, telling them that their aggressive handling of Diana was causing permanent, long-term damage to the reputation of the monarchy itself. Diana became aware of this internal defense through mutual friends in the Spencer family network. The text of the letter found in the Althorp stables explicitly referenced this hidden dynamic. In the opening paragraph, Diana thanked Anne for her sharp, unspoken support during a particularly hostile meeting with royal lawyers in London earlier that month. She wrote that Anne's cold glare across the boardroom table had been the only thing that prevented the state attorneys from forcing her into a highly restrictive, legally binding confidentiality agreement regarding her future public work. Diana went on to describe the intense isolation she felt living inside Kensington Palace during that final summer. She wrote that her telephone lines were constantly producing a strange, rhythmic clicking sound, leading her to believe that her private conversations were being actively recorded by external security teams. She stated that the only person she felt she could trust with an unvarnished written truth was the one woman who had the courage to look the king's advisors in the eye and call them out for their duplicity. The letter also shed light on the mystery of the dark green vehicle that had visited Althorp in the early hours of August 25, 1997. Diana confirmed that she had reached out to Anne to establish a secure, emergency courier route that bypassed the standard Royal Mail delivery system. She knew that any letter sent through the official palace post rooms would be opened, logged, and copied by the security services before reaching its destination. The stable block had been chosen as the drop point because it was managed by a loyal Spencer estate worker who was entirely detached from the royal network. As Charles Spencer read these passages over the secure line, the historical puzzle pieces finally locked into place. The public had been led to believe that Diana was entirely alone and frantic during her final weeks, cut off from any support within the royal family tree. The reality was that a silent operational bridge had been built between the most vulnerable member of the court and its most disciplined anchor. Princess Anne had been quietly acting as an unofficial, confidential sounding board for her former sister-in-law, keeping the line open even as the official palace hierarchy tried to erase Diana from the institutional fabric. The conversation between the Earl and the Princess Royal ended with a practical agreement. Anne informed Spencer that she would travel to Northamptonshire in person the following evening, traveling without her standard public diary team to avoid alerting the metropolitan press. She stated that she needed to see the physical document with her own eyes before the palace legal team could draft a formal injunction to freeze the information. The hidden relationship between the two women was about to re-emerge into the modern era, forcing a massive, uncomfortable re-evaluation of how the royal family truly managed its deepest internal crises during the darkest days of the late 20th century. The bombshell request regarding William and Harry. The second page of the linen paper held the true purpose of Princess Diana's desperate message. The handwriting became distinctly tighter here, the letters leaning sharply forward as if written in a moment of intense emotional urgency. Charles Spencer adjusted his desk lamp in the Grand Library, reading the lines aloud to Princess Anne over the encrypted telephone line. Diana had completely abandoned all discussion of her own safety. Instead, she turned her focus entirely toward the immediate psychological future of her two young boys, Prince William and Prince Harry. The text revealed that Diana had become deeply alarmed by a specific administrative meeting that had taken place at Buckingham Palace in June 1997. During that meeting, a special committee of senior courtiers had drafted a provisional blueprint for the boys' public deployment over the next 10 years. The blueprint treated the princes as corporate assets of the state. It outlined a rigid, exhausting schedule of public appearances, international tours, and military training designed to restore the crown's popularity following the damage caused by the royal divorce. Diana wrote that she was terrified the institutional machine would completely swallow her children's humanity. She knew that, as William approached his 15th birthday, the pressure to mold him into a distant, stoic future monarch would intensify. She expressed a profound fear that Harry would be pushed into the role of a secondary supporter, neglected by the system until he was needed for a public relations photo opportunity. She wrote that she could already see the early signs of emotional distress in both boys, hidden behind their polite public smiles during their official appearances. She turned directly to Anne with a massive, unprecedented request. She begged the Princess Royal to act as an unofficial institutional shield for the boys, if she were ever permanently removed from their lives. Diana wrote that she did not trust her former husband's advisors to prioritize the emotional well-being of the children over the public relations needs of the crown. She explicitly asked Anne to use her immense personal authority within the family to intervene if the boys were ever pushed into a public, bitter rift by calculating courtiers who sought to play them against each other for the sake of the succession. The letter contained a specific clause that stunned both the Earl and the Princess Royal. Diana wrote that she had established a private, unlisted asset with a trusted financial institution in Zurich under a corporate shell name. This asset did not contain gold or traditional currency. It was a secure safety deposit box holding a comprehensive collection of her personal diaries, recorded cassette tapes, and private legal documents spanning from 1985 to 1997. Diana's command was explicit. She wanted Anne to take absolute, independent control of this safety deposit box. She did not want the documents to ever fall into the hands of the Royal Archives or the state executors, who she knew would immediately stamp them as confidential and bury them forever under the Official Secrets Act. She wanted Anne to preserve these records as an ultimate insurance policy for the boys. If the palace inner circle ever attempted to completely rewrite history or strip the princes of their personal autonomy, Anne was authorized to hand the diaries directly to William when he reached his 35th birthday. This revelation completely reevaluated the historical timeline of the family's internal management. For decades, the public believed that Princess Anne had simply remained a distant, dutiful aunt who stayed out of the turbulent lives of her nephews. The letter proved that she had been handed a secret, solemn mandate from beyond the grave by a mother who had no one else to turn to. Anne had been quietly monitoring the development of both princes for 30 years, carrying the immense psychological weight of a secret pact that no other member of the royal family was ever permitted to know. Over the phone line, the silence from Gatcombe Park was absolute as Charles Spencer finished reading the section. The Earl asked his sister if she had ever received the access codes for the Zurich box. Anne's voice came back through the receiver, remarkably steady but laced with a deep, historic gravity. She confirmed that she had retrieved the canister containing the diaries in 2002, traveling to Switzerland under a completely unlisted passport during a private equestrian trip. She had kept the documents hidden inside her own secure vault in Gloucestershire for over 2 decades, honoring her former sister-in-law's final wish without a single leak to the media or the rest of the household. The tension climbed when the Earl pointed out the immediate danger of the situation. Now that the letter detailing the existence of these private diaries had been uncovered in the Althorp stables, the palace legal team would move swiftly to demand their total surrender. The institutional machinery would view a cache of unedited private diaries from Princess Diana as an absolute threat to the stability of the current reign. The discovery had transformed a historical document into an active, volatile piece of leverage that could trigger an unprecedented constitutional and personal crisis within the senior ranks of the monarchy. The secret meeting at Gatcombe Park. The headlight beams of a dark gray utility vehicle cut through the heavy evening mist surrounding Gatcombe Park at 8 o'clock. The vehicle did not display any official royal emblems. It bypassed the main security checkpoint, utilizing a narrow gravel track normally reserved for forestry workers on the Gloucestershire estate. Charles Spencer sat in the passenger seat, his hands resting on top of the small leather briefcase that held the original 3-page linen letter from Princess Diana. The car pulled up to the rear entrance of the stone manor house. The door opened before the vehicle had fully stopped. Princess Anne's private groom stood in the shadows, signaling for the Earl to move quickly into the house. The interior of the residence was quiet, completely clear of the senior courtiers who usually managed the daily routines of the Princess Royal. Anne was waiting in her private study, a wood-paneled room filled with equestrian silver trophies and historical maps of the county. She did not offer a formal greeting. She pointed directly to the leather armchair across from her desk. Charles Spencer opened the briefcase, lifted the yellowed envelope, and laid it flat on the green leather blotting pad. Anne picked up her reading glasses from the table, but did not put them on immediately. For nearly a minute, she simply stared down at her former sister-in-law's handwriting, her fingers tracing the blue ink of the address without touching the paper itself. When she finally pulled the pages from the envelope, her face remained entirely rigid. She read the first page in absolute silence, her eyes moving rapidly across the dense script. The only sound in the room was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner and the occasional pop of dry logs burning in the open stone fireplace. Charles watched her closely, noting that her breathing became noticeably slower as she reached the section detailing the hidden diaries in Switzerland. The reality of their secret pact was now laid out before them. Anne reached the part of the text where Diana begged her to act as an institutional shield for the boys. She read the specific sentence where Diana foresaw a time when the crown would attempt to split Prince William and Prince Harry apart to protect the image of the heir. A slight twitch in Anne's jaw was the only physical indication that the words had struck a raw nerve. She knew better than anyone how accurately Diana had predicted the future fractures within the family. The tension in the room exploded when an internal telephone line on the desk began to buzz with a low, rhythmic hum. It was the secure link connected directly to Windsor Castle. The screen on the device lit up with the encryption code of King Charles's private office. Anne did not answer it. She allowed the phone to ring for a full minute until the line went dead, only for it to start buzzing again 10 seconds later. The palace machinery was tracking her movements, and they knew the Earl of Spencer was inside her house. The phone rang a third time. Anne reached out and pressed the speaker button. The voice of Sir Clive Alderton, the King's principal private secretary, filled the quiet room. His tone was hurried, stripped of the usual polite diplomatic deferrals. He informed the Princess Royal that the King was aware of the discovery at Althorp. He stated that a formal executive order was currently being drafted by the Home Office to classify the contents of the letter under national heritage protection laws. Alderton delivered a direct message from the monarch. The king requested that Anne immediately hand the document over to a royal courier who was already driving toward Gloucestershire from London. The palace was offering a quiet financial settlement to the Spencer estate to acquire the letter for the royal collection, ensuring it would be stored away from public scrutiny forever. The secretary implied that if the letter or the existence of the Zurich diaries were ever leaked to the media, the government would consider it a severe breach of state security. Anne cut the secretary off mid-sentence. Her voice was cold, sharp, and entirely authoritative. She told Alderton that she did not take instructions from private secretaries, nor did she allow the government to dictate how she managed her private correspondence. She stated that the letter was addressed to her personally on private land, and that any courier arriving at her gates would be turned away by a state security for trespassing. She told him to inform the king that the document was safe, but it would not be entering the archives. She hit the disconnect button before the secretary could offer a response. She looked across the desk at Charles Spencer. She confirmed that the palace had been trying to locate the source of Diana's private papers for over 15 years. They had launched multiple internal audits of her estate, searching through old bank accounts and storage facilities in London, but they had never suspected that the diaries were sitting inside a reinforced gun safe in the cellar of Gatcombe Park. Anne had fulfilled the first part of Diana's command perfectly, keeping the insurance policy hidden until the boys reached maturity. But the situation had now changed drastically. With the discovery of the original letter, the existence of the diaries was no longer a secret. The king's advisors would use every legal tool available to demand an emergency injunction, claiming the papers contained sensitive details about the inner workings of the state during the 90s. Anne realized that holding on to the collection would require an open public confrontation with her brother, a move that would completely shatter the public image of absolute stability she had spent 50 years building. She stood up and walked over to the small wall safe hidden behind a landscape painting of the Scottish Highlands. She dialed the combination with practiced, steady movements. The heavy steel door swung open with a soft click. Instead of pulling out documents, she lifted a heavy, leather-bound volume from the shelf. It was her own personal diary from August 1997. She laid it next to Diana's letter, opening it to the entry dated August 25th. The text in Anne's diary confirmed the facts of the midnight courier run to Althorp. She had recorded her own thoughts on the night she sent the vehicle to collect Diana's final papers. She wrote that she knew the system was trying to break the princess, and she felt a profound duty as a sister and a mother to provide a line of retreat. The two documents sitting side by side on the desk represented a 30-year history of silent resistance against the cold pragmatism of the Crown's advisors. The secret meeting at Gatcombe Park had solidified a dangerous reality. The Princess Royal was holding the ultimate truth about the modern monarchy, and she had no intention of letting the institution bury it. The palace scrambles to control the narrative. The lights inside the press office at Buckingham Palace remained fully illuminated at midnight. A fleet of black luxury saloons sat idling in the courtyard, their exhaust fumes rising into the cold rain. Senior media strategists, constitutional lawyers, and private secretaries hurried through the stone corridors. They held confidential folders stamped with red priority markers. An emergency operations meeting had been called by the Lord Chamberlain to handle the fallout from the Gatcombe Park dispute. The institutional panic was driven by a single, critical factor: timing. The discovery of the letter occurred during a delicate period for the monarchy's public relations campaign. The palace press team had spent the previous 6 months executing a meticulous, multi-million-pound branding strategy designed to bolster the public approval ratings of King Charles and Queen Camilla. The core of this strategy was to present the current reign as a period of absolute stability, quiet professionalism, and forward-looking modernization. The re-emergence of Princess Diana's voice threatened to dismantle that polished narrative instantly. The corporate analysts in the press room realized that a document detailing the systematic isolation of the princess would trigger a massive wave of public nostalgia and resentment. More dangerously, the revelation that Princess Anne had been operating a secret, parallel line of support for Diana completely undermined the official historical record that the palace had carefully curated for 30 years. By 1 o'clock in the morning, the legal team had drafted a provisional injunction under the terms of the Administration of Justice Act. The document sought to prevent Charles Spencer or any media outlet from publishing the exact text of the letter. The lawyers argued that the correspondence contained highly sensitive references to the internal security protocols of the royal household, meaning its public disclosure would constitute a direct threat to the personal safety of the sovereign. It was a standard, heavy-handed legal maneuver designed to tie the document up in the High Court for months. The strategy failed before the ink on the injunction was even dry. At 1:15, a senior digital communications officer entered the room with an update. An independent news agency had just published a brief, highly accurate summary of the letter's existence on an international news platform based in New York. The leak did not come from Althorp or Gatcombe Park. It came from a junior technician within the palace's own secure messaging network who had intercepted the internal email tracking Princess Anne's location. The digital data showed the story was spreading globally at an uncontrollable rate. Within 20 minutes, the headline had been picked up by major networks across Europe, North America, and Australia. The palace lawyers realized that filing an injunction in a British court was now entirely useless. You cannot legally suppress a document that is already being discussed on international servers outside the jurisdiction of the UK legal system. The information was out, and the institution had lost its window of control. Inside the private apartments at Windsor Castle, King Charles sat at his desk, surrounded by his closest personal advisors. He looked deeply troubled as he listened to the media director explain the situation. The king's concern was not merely about public relations. He was deeply wounded by the realization that his own sister had kept a massive strategic secret from him for over 3 decades. He felt a profound sense of institutional and personal betrayal. He could not understand why Anne had chosen to align herself with Diana's memory, rather than the unified front of the family. The king pushed his advisors out of the room and initiated a direct, private call to Gatcombe Park. When Anne answered, Charles did not use his administrative tone. He spoke as a brother, asking her directly if she truly intended to allow these hidden diaries to be released to the public. He reminded her of the immense work they had both put into stabilizing the country following the death of their mother, Queen Elizabeth II. He argued that digging up the raw traumas of the 90s would only serve to destabilize the crown at a time when the modern public was already skeptical of royal privilege. Anne's response was characteristically direct and unyielding. She told her brother that she had no intention of releasing the diaries to the media or using them to damage his administration. She emphasized that she had spent her entire adult life defending the dignity of the crown. However, she made it clear that she would not allow his advisors to seize the papers or erase the promise she had made to a dying mother. She stated that the Zurich diaries belonged to Prince William, and she would deliver them to his hand exactly as Diana had requested, without a single page being reviewed or censored by a palace committee. This statement shifted the focus of the crisis entirely toward the heir to the throne. The private secretaries realized that the ultimate impact of the letter depended on how William responded to his aunt's revelation. If the Prince of Wales chose to align himself with the traditional palace guard and surrender the papers to the state archives, the narrative could be contained. If he chose to accept the diaries and honor his mother's secret insurance policy, the balance of power within the royal household would permanently tilt toward the younger generation. The palace press team spent the remaining hours of the night drafting a highly defensive public statement. They knew they could no longer deny the existence of the letter or the hidden connection between the two women. The new strategy was to downplay the drama, framing the correspondence as a touching, private family matter from a difficult historical era that had long since passed. They wanted to project an image of a mature, united family that was entirely unbothered by historical discoveries. But behind the calm vocabulary of the press release, the internal panic remained absolute. The courtiers knew that the foundation of their authority had been cracked. For 30 years, they had operated under the assumption that they controlled the flow of historical information surrounding the royal family. The discovery in the Althorp stables had proven that the true history of the monarchy was not stored in their regulated vaults, but in the private silent pacts made by its most disciplined members. The palace machinery had been completely outmaneuvered by a voice from the past, and an icy princess who refused to break her word. The nation reacts in tears. The official clock on the tower of St. Paul's Cathedral struck 8 the following morning, as the first verified excerpts of the letter appeared on the screens of millions of commuters. It did not require a royal commentator to explain the gravity of the words. The raw text spoke entirely for itself. Across London, people stood completely still on train platforms, holding their phones, reading the desperate message a young mother had sent to Princess Anne just 7 days before her life was cut short. The emotional impact on the British public was immediate and overwhelming. For 30 years, the official narrative had subtly suggested that Princess Diana had spent her final weeks completely detached from any support structure within the royal family tree. The discovery in the Althorp estate shattered that assumption. It revealed that beneath the icy public exterior of the palace hierarchy, a profound, silent alliance of mutual respect had existed between the two most iconic women of that turbulent era. By midday, thousands of citizens began walking toward the Diana Memorial Fountain in Hyde Park. They did not carry corporate banners or signs. They brought simple bouquets of white roses and handwritten cards thanking Princess Anne for her silent loyalty. The text of the letter had temporarily unified a fractured nation, shifting the public focus away from the polished marketing campaigns of the modern court, and returning it to the genuine human vulnerabilities that Diana had never been afraid to show. Anne spent the afternoon carrying out her pre-scheduled engagement in Aberdeenshire, refusing to alter a single detail of her diary. When she stepped out of her vehicle, the waiting crowd did not offer their usual polite applause. They fell into an absolute respectful silence, with several onlookers visibly wiping tears from their faces. Anne paused for a brief moment, looked at the crowd, and gave a sharp, appreciative nod before walking into the building. She had honored her secret pact, protected her nephews, and proven that true devotion to the crown is measured by silent integrity, not public relations strategies. The re-emergence of this long-lost letter completely changes our understanding of the royal family's most difficult chapter. It proves that even during the darkest days of the late 20th century, a silent bond of duty and protection was operating behind the scenes to shield the future of the monarchy.